There is this amazing channel called Voxy VFX. They do a lot of VFX courses, but mostly for Houdini. I saw this flower disintegration and I thought I could try it in Blender. So this is what I managed to do, and it's what we're going to do in this video. If you want to check out the project files, they're going to be on my Patreon page and my Gumroad page. So let's jump right into it. So we have our flower. Now let's start disintegrating it. We can use a particle system to instance a few particles. Make sure that the start and end frame are the same. So set that to 1. I'm going to go to the render or viewport display and change the size to make them very small. And if you hit play, they all fall down. We don't want that. So I'm just going to go unfilled weights and turn down the gravity so that it's 0, and go to the velocity, turn that to 0 as well. And now the particles are in the same place. We want to be able to move them in this direction using some object. I'm going to add a wind force and I just rotate it facing this direction. And if I hit play, they all go in the same direction. So they're all being blown away by wind. I don't want them to be blown away at the same time. I want the particles from here to be blown away first, and then we have a gradual transition like that. Yeah, so to set that up, to do that, let's change a few things to make visualizing this much easier. So I'm going to go to the wind and first turn it off for a second. So I'll go in here, turn off affect location and rotation so that it doesn't really affect our object. So then I can go in here and add an explosion modifier that will cut the meshes into different chunks. And if we go to random preview here, you can see the different chunks there that are being split. If you turn on size, each chunk is going to be the size of these dots here, these particles. So I can go to the particle system and make sure that the render size is set to 1, that way, so that we still get the same shape as we had before. I'm also going to turn off these dots here by changing the render as from hello to object, and we have that. Now, if I play with the size random, you can see the different sizes we are looking at. To properly visualize what we want to do, I'm going to have this size be affected by a texture gradient. So to do that, I'm going to scroll down and add a new texture. I'll call this size, go into it and use a gradient texture or a blend texture. That gives us something like that. I'll turn off and make sure that the only thing that is being affected is the size. I like that. Now change the mapping from generated to object, and let's add an empty to control this gradient. Let me first scale it down or reduce its display size. Not the scale, but its display size. Go back to the texture and select it as my gradient. If I move this around, we should see that it's affecting the size of our particles. And because we have this gradient, it's creating a gradient size of our chunks. If you want to make this more pronounced, we can go down to the color ramp and just make that even more visible. So you can see the closer it is. Yeah, so you can easily make a reveal effect just like that. We want it to be the opposite side, so I'm just going to flip this. Yeah, so when it's moving away, we get something like that. Now let's create another gradient or another texture. So I'll go back to the particles, scroll down, create a new texture. This time, let's call it wind, and I want to control it with something with a different gradient. So let's first animate this transition here. So I want this to start here, keyframe there, and just have something like that. So if we animate this, perfect. Now for our wind gradient, again, we need to use a similar gradient, but with a different animation. So I'm going to duplicate this and just move it aside. But you can see it's moving back to this current position. So let me just make sure it's in a different final position so that I can easily tell them apart. And maybe you can even change the display type to a sphere. Okay, so we have this, and I want this to control our wind. So to control the wind, I'm going to come back to this, go back to the texture, and under our mapping, we need to make sure that it's set to object, and this is our object. And the influence this time, instead of generated, we want to use force fields. And since our wind is part of the force field, it should be affected by our gradient. So, but to visualize this much better, let me first turn off some of these effects. So I'm going to first turn off this, go back to the particles and change this back to to halos so that we can see the halos. They're not being affected by the wind right now. And make sure you turn back the wind on. I think I might have forgotten to do that. And you can see we have something that is working. Then you scroll down to your colors and then make sure that the brightness and contrast are set to 1. Turn on color ramp and move these nodes nearly to the middle like that, so that they're to their halfway point like that. And now you should be able to affect the transition like that. Now we can also add different forces. For example, I can add a turbulence force. So I'll go under here and just change this to a turbulence force. And maybe this time, let me increase the turbulence. You can see we get, the scale can be a bit perfect. I think that's better. And again, we just have to re-enable the explode particles to get these to disappear like that. Very, very simple trick. And remember, this other empty controls the size. So if I offset the size a bit, I can make these particles stay around for a while. I can even offset this even further, and then they disappear later. Now let's go to the materials. Okay, so we have our rose here. So we have this material is for the rose. I'm going to create another one for the fire and then what this turns into. So first of all, let's create a mask that is going to create the gradient. So I'm going to use a gradient that looks like that. Add texture coordinates. I'm going to use object mapping and use the same. Let's use this turbulence. So yeah, the turbulence empty we're using is already animated, so let's just use that. But I don't want the gradient to be gradual. Actually, let me add a ramp here, color ramp, to add more contrast to this. So if I do this, you want a very clear line between the disintegrated part and the non-disintegrated parts. And I think I need to push this a bit. But like I said, I don't want it to be very a straight line like that. So what I can do is use a noise texture and use vector math and just multiply the noise texture into the gradient using multiply. And I can play with the scale to make this more distorted. Can add more detail, more roughness. I think that's good enough. And just push this somewhere like that. And we have something. And again, your animation speed is going to be controlled by these two objects. So if I scale their animation, it should be slower or it should be faster. So I think that's perfect. Now, this gradient mask can be used for a lot of things. So I can create an emission and use a mix shader. This is going to be our mask. And this is going to be the second shader we are mixing in. This can be fire, and I can just use the same gradient we have here. So I'll just get another gradient and just use this here. Use this as the color. Make this fade a bit. This is going to be reddish. So we want the rest to turn into ash after it burns. Create another material that is going to be harsh, but instead of it being red, we can use a hue and saturation and desaturate this. Maybe add some noise, blend in some noise. Basically trying to make it look like ash. You can improve the material, but yeah, so then finally you blend these two, and this time we can use another gradient to blend as the mask for this. So I'll just add that there and just push this now further. So you can see we have three materials. We have the fire. I think I need to do this, let's say a 10. this is all procedure. And if you want to simulate smoke, what we're going to do, we're going to need another object. Let's use this cube here. Go to the vertex weight, vertex groups, and assign it vertex group like that. Animate it moving from left to right like what we had before. And I'm going to just turn on in the view, turn on wireframe so that we can see it, visualize what we're doing easier. And I'll come here, come to the flower, give it its own vertex groups. Just select everything, assign. Now if you go to weights, we get that. Now if we go to the modifiers, we can add a weight proximity modifier. Select the vertex group we want and select the cube, which I think is this, and we need this to be geometry. And you can see now that adds a vertex group. You can add more subdivisions to this to get a much smoother subdivision. And if you want, you can even add the interior to have some vertices. If you go to weight paint, this is what we get, a nice weight paint. Then we can turn this into smoke. I'll just use a quick smoke, just like that. And then for this, we can go to the fluid system, fluid settings, inflow, and vertex group, the vertex group we have created. Now you can see we are emitting the smoke on every part of the flower. So if we change the fall of type for the weight, so we can invert the weight, you see now we are emitting smoke where the texture is, where our gradient is happening. So actually I'm going to remove these keyframes and just parent this to this. So Ctrl P. Now if I hit play now, you see how our smoke is growing. Now actually I need to bring back all of these so that we have everything working. Yeah, you can see our smoke. So after that, you just have to add some materials, do some colors, and you're good to go. Thank you for watching. All project files are going to be in the description on my Patreon page and my Gumroad page. See you in the next video.